I remember the day I first noticed something was wrong. I was 7 years old, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, the summer sun streaming through lace curtains that had yellowed with age. The house smelled of cinnamon and cloves, a scent that followed my grandmother everywhere. I was leafing through a dusty photo album I'd found in the attic, fascinated by the black and white images of people who shared my eyes, my nose, my smile. "Who's this?" "Grandma," I asked, pointing to a man standing next to my grandfather in a faded photograph. He was tall and lean, with dark hair slicked back, his arm draped casually over my grandfather's shoulder. Both men were smiling, but there was something about the tall man's smile that seemed off, like he knew something no one else did. The change in my grandmother was immediate. The wooden spoon she'd been using to stir her famous apple butter clattered to the floor. When she turned to look at me, her face had drained of all color, her hands trembling as she rushed across the room and slammed the album shut. "We don't speak of him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't say his name ever." She took the album from me and tucked it under her arm, her eyes darting to the windows as if checking to see if someone might be watching. "Promise me, Ellanor. Promise me you'll never speak of him." I nodded, too frightened by her reaction to do anything else. "I promise, Grandma." That was the first time I realized my family had secrets. Dark ones. Growing up in Millbrook was like growing up in any small town in New England. Everyone knew everyone's business, or at least they thought they did. Our town had a population of just under 2,000 people, most of whom could trace their family lineage back to the original settlers. My family had been there since 1842 when my great-great-grandfather built the house we still lived in on Pioneer Hill Road. The house itself was a character in my childhood, a sprawling Victorian, with gabled roofs, a wraparound porch, and more rooms than we knew what to do with. It creaked and groaned with the changing seasons, as if it were alive and breathing alongside us. I loved every inch of it, from the hidden cupboard beneath the stairs to the attic with its treasure trove of forgotten heirlooms. But after that day in the kitchen, I began to notice things. Little things at first. How my mother and grandmother would exchange glances whenever someone new came to town. How they would check and double-check the locks at night. How my grandmother would sometimes stop mid-sentence and tilt her head as if listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. "It's nothing," she'd say when I asked about it. "Just the house settling." But I knew better. The house had its own sounds, and I knew them all. This was something else. As I grew older, I became more aware of the gaps in our family history, the missing pieces that no one would talk about. There were cousins I'd never met, aunts and uncles, whose names were only mentioned in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. And then there was him, the man in the photograph whose name was forbidden. I called him the Nameless One in my mind, building elaborate fantasies about who he might be. A spy perhaps, or a criminal on the run. Maybe he'd done something so terrible that my family had disowned him, struck his name from our history, like the ancient Egyptians had done with pharaohs who fell from grace. When I was 12, I found the photo album again, hidden in the back of my grandmother's closet behind shoe boxes filled with ancient receipts and birthday cards. I was supposed to be looking for her pearl earrings, which she wanted to wear to Sunday service. But the moment my fingers brushed against the leather cover of the album, I forgot all about the earrings. I sat cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom, the album open on my lap, and there he was again, the Nameless One. There were more photos of him than I'd realized. Him leaning against a car I didn't recognize, the license plate too blurry to read, him at what looked like a family picnic, his arm around a woman I didn't know, and one of him standing in front of our house, his face half in shadow despite the bright day, looking up at the windows as if searching for Someone. The sound of my grandmother's footsteps on the stairs gave me just enough time to shove the album back where I'd found it and pretend to be searching through another box. "Did you find them?" she asked from the doorway. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. Could she tell I'd been looking at the forbidden photographs? Could she sense it somehow? "Never mind," she said, coming into the room. "I think I left them in the bathroom." She paused, looking at me oddly. "What's wrong, Ellanor? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Nothing," I said quickly. "Too quickly. Just dusty in here." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the closet door for a moment too long. That night, I heard her moving around long after everyone else had gone to bed. The next day, when I checked, the album was gone. High school brought new distractions. Friends, boys, dreams of college, an escape from our small town. But the mystery of the Nameless One continued to haunt me. I'd catch snippets of conversations between my mother and grandmother, always falling silent when I entered the room. Once I overheard my grandmother on the phone, her voice tight with fear. "He's been seen again," she was saying in Hartford this time. "Margaret swears it was him." After all these years, my mother replied incredulous. "It can't be." "You know what he said?" My grandmother's voice dropped even lower. "He said he'd come back for us. All of us." I didn't know then what those words meant, but they sent a chill down my spine that I can still feel today when I think about them. My grandmother passed away the summer after I graduated from college. I'd been away studying literature at a university on the West Coast, determined to put as much distance between myself and Millbrook as possible. Not because I didn't love my family, but because I felt smothered by the weight of unspoken secrets, of glances exchanged over my head, of doors that closed whenever I approached. I flew back for the funeral. Of course, my grandmother and I had always been close, despite the wall of silence she built around certain aspects of our family history. She'd been the one who'd encouraged my love of books, who'd sat with me for hours as I read aloud from Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. She'd taught me to bake her famous apple butter, to knit, to recognize the different birds that visited our garden. She'd been the one constant in my life, the North Star by which I navigated my childhood. Her funeral was small, just family and a few close friends. As I stood by her grave, watching the casket being lowered into the ground, I felt a strange sensation, as if someone was watching me. I looked up, scanning the small crowd. And for just a moment, I thought I saw a man standing at the edge of the cemetery, partially hidden by an ancient oak tree, tall and lean, with dark hair now streaked with grey. But when I blinked, he was gone, and I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, a manifestation of grief. After the service, we gathered at the house on Pioneer Hill Road for the reception. I wandered through the rooms, nodding at distant relatives and accepting condolences from neighbors I barely remembered. The house felt different. Without my grandmother, emptier, colder somehow, despite the summer heat and the bodies packed into the parlor. Ellanor, my mother called, her face drawn with grief and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Come with me." She led me upstairs to my grandmother's bedroom, untouched since she'd been taken to the hospital 3 weeks earlier. The bed was still made with military precision, her reading glasses still on the nightstand, next to a dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice. "Your grandmother left something for you," my mother said, reaching into the pocket of her black dress and pulling out a small brass key. "She wanted you to have this after she was gone." I took the key, turning it over in my palm. It was old, the metal worn smooth in places from years of handling. "What does it open?" My mother's eyes darted to the window, a gesture so reminiscent of my grandmother that my throat tightened. "She said you'd figure it out," that you always were too curious. For your own good. She hesitated, then added, Ellanor, whatever you find, be careful. Some questions are better left unanswered. With that cryptic warning, she left me alone in my grandmother's room, the key cold and heavy in my hand. It took me 3 days to find what the key opened. 3 days of searching every lock in the house, from the antique secretary desk in the study to the padlock on the garden shed. I was about to give up when I remembered the hidden cupboard beneath the stairs. A small space where I used to hide as a child, pretending I was Harry Potter or Lucy Pevensey, waiting for magic to find me. The cupboard had a false back, something I discovered accidentally when I was 9 and then promptly forgotten about. It had been empty then, just a hollow space in the wall, dusty and disappointing. But when I pushed against the panel now, it swung open to reveal a small metal box with a keyhole that looked just the right size for my grandmother's key. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open, and I lifted the lid to find a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, a small leather-bound journal, and a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed my grandmother as a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, standing next to the man from the album, the Nameless One. They were both smiling, her head tilted toward him, his arm around her waist. They looked happy in love even. I untied the ribbon and picked up the first letter. The paper was thin and yellowing. The ink faded to a sepia brown. It was dated June 12, 1954. My dearest Rebecca, it began. My grandmother's name. I count the days until I can see you again. The hours we spend apart are an agony I can scarcely bear. The letter was signed simply J. I finally had a letter, if not a full name. I read through the stack of letters, each one more passionate than the last, telling a story of a love affair that had clearly consumed them both. J wrote of their secret meetings, of plans for a future together, of a love that would transcend time itself. The last letter was different, dated October 31st, 1957. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. Rebecca, they know. I don't know how. But they know what I've done, what I am. I have to leave, but I promise I will come back for you. No matter how long it takes, no matter what stands in our way, they can't keep us apart forever. Wait for me and remember, speak my name and I will find you always. J. I set the letters aside and picked up the journal. My grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, entries spanning from 1954 to 1960. It told a story so incredible, so terrifying that at first I thought it must be fiction. My grandmother's attempt at a horror novel perhaps, but as I read on, the details were too specific, too raw with emotion to be anything but the truth as she had experienced it. According to her journal, James Holloway had come to Millbrook in the spring of 1954, taking a room at the boarding house on Elm Street. He was charming and handsome with an easy smile and stories of travels to exotic places. Everyone in town was captivated by him, but none more so than my grandmother, who was 22 and working at the town library. They began a secret romance, meeting in the woods beyond Pine Hill at the abandoned Simmons farm outside of town, anywhere they could be alone. My grandmother wrote of his kisses, of the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world, of how he promised to take her away from Millbrook to see all the places he'd told her about. Paris, Rome, Cairo. But there was something else about James, something my grandmother only hinted at in her earlier entries. He seemed to know things about people, about events that hadn't yet happened. He would tell her to avoid certain places on certain days, and later she would learn of accidents or crimes that had occurred exactly where he'd warned her not to go. It's as if he can see the future, she wrote. He says it's just intuition, but it's more than that. Sometimes when he talks about the past, it's as if he was there. Even for events that happened long before he was born. He describes them with such vivid detail, such certainty. As their relationship deepened, James began to share more with my grandmother. He told her he had a gift or a curse, depending on how you looked at it. He claimed he was much older than he appeared, that he had lived many lives, that he could move through time in ways others couldn't. He says he was born in 1857, my grandmother wrote, and that he stopped aging when he was 30. He showed me a photograph of himself from 1887, standing in front of a building in London that no longer exists. He is wearing the fashion of the time, but his face, it's the same. Exactly the same. I should think he's mad, but I've seen other evidence. He knows too much, remembers too much. And sometimes when I look into his eyes, I see the weight of centuries there. According to my grandmother, James had been searching for something his entire extended life. A way to end his condition, to age and die naturally. Like everyone else, he'd traveled the world, consulting with scientists, mystics, anyone who might have answers. His search had led him to Millbrook because of rumors about a local family, the Caldwells, who were said to possess an ancient artifact with the power to grant or remove immortality. The Caldwells don't know what they have. My grandmother quoted James as saying, it's been in their family for generations, passed down as a simple heirloom. They think it's just an old medallion with strange markings, but it's so much more than that. James had ingratiated himself with the Caldwell family, becoming a regular guest at their home, all while searching for the medallion. And then in October of 1957, he found it and took it. He showed it to me tonight. My grandmother wrote, a small disc of metal unlike any I've seen before, covered in symbols I don't recognize. He was elated, saying this was the key to everything, that now he could control his condition, perhaps even share it with someone else, with me. But the Caldwells had discovered the theft, and they knew more about the medallion than James had given them credit for. They knew what it could do. And they knew what James was. They'd been protecting the medallion for centuries from people exactly like him. The next entry in my grandmother's journal was dated 3 weeks later, and her handwriting had changed. Shaky, uneven. As if written by someone in the grip of terror. He came to me last night, bloody and desperate. The Caldwells had caught up with him at the edge of town. They had weapons, not guns or knives, but something else. Something that could hurt even him. He was wounded in a way I've never seen before. His skin turning grey and papery around the wound, as if he were aging rapidly just in that one spot. James had escaped, barely, and come to my grandmother for help. She'd hidden him in the attic of her parents' house, this house, and tended to his wound as best she could. For 3 days and nights, he hovered between life and death, the strange aging effect spreading slowly from the wound on his arm. He's afraid, she wrote. For the first time since I've known him, James is truly afraid. He says if the aging spreads to his heart, he will die. Not just this body, but his consciousness, his soul, everything. It will be a true and final death. On the 3rd night, James had recovered enough to move. He told my grandmother he had to leave to get as far from Millbrook and the Caldwells as possible while he healed completely. He asked me to go with him. My grandmother wrote to take the medallion and run. He says with it, he could make me like him, ageless, timeless. We could be together forever, watching the centuries pass like seasons. Part of me wants to say yes to leave this small town behind and experience eternity with the man I love. But another part of me is afraid, not of living forever, but of what James might become. There's a hunger in him now that wasn't there before. A desperation that frightens me. In the end, my grandmother had refused. James had left alone, taking the medallion with him, but not before making a promise or perhaps a threat. He held my face between his hands and made me swear never to speak his name aloud. She wrote, he said, names have power, especially his, that if I ever spoke it, he would know, no matter where he was, no matter how much time had passed, he would feel it like a beacon calling him home, and he would come back for me. The last entry in the journal was dated January 15, 1960. I married Thomas today. He is a good man, kind, and steady. He loves me, and in time, I think I may learn to love him, too. Not like I loved James, never like that, but enough for a good life, a normal life. Thomas knows nothing of what happened, and I intend to keep it that way. The Caldwells have kept their distance, though. Mr. Caldwell nodded to me at church last Sunday in a way that makes me think he knows I was involved somehow. Perhaps they're just grateful the medallion is gone from Millbrook along with James. I still dream of him. Sometimes, of his eyes, of his touch, of the future he promised me. But I've made my choice. I've chosen the path of mortality, of normality. I will have children and they will have children. I will age. I will die as all humans are meant to do. But I will keep my promise. I will never speak his name. And I will teach my children and my children's children to do the same because I know in my heart that James will keep his promise, too. If he hears his name spoken by someone of my blood, he will come back. And God help us all if he does. The journal ended there, but my grandmother's story didn't. She had indeed had children. My mother and my Uncle David, she had taught them the same rule she had taught me. Never to speak of the man in the photographs, never to say his name. A superstition I had always thought, a strange family quirk. But now I knew better. I sat in the hidden cupboard for a long time. The letters and journals spread around me, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the delusions of a young woman caught up in a passionate affair, or perhaps the early signs of the mental illness that had plagued my great-grandfather in his later years. Time travelers and immortals belonged in books and movies. Not in real life, not in my family history. But there were the photographs. James looking exactly the same in pictures supposedly taken years apart. And there was the fear I'd seen in my grandmother's eyes whenever the subject of the Nameless One came up. A fear too visceral to be based on nothing. I gathered everything back into the metal box and locked it, taking it up to my old bedroom. I needed time to process what I'd discovered to decide what to do with this information. That night, I dreamed of James Holloway. He stood at the foot of my bed, looking just as he did in the photographs, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Ellanor," he said, his voice soft and mesmerizing. "You found her journal. You know about me now." I tried to speak but couldn't, my voice frozen in my throat. "Don't be afraid," he said, moving closer. "I loved your grandmother very much. I would never harm anyone of her blood." He sat on the edge of the bed, and I could smell him. A strange metallic scent, mixed with something older, like dust in ancient tombs. "But I need your help, Ellanor. The medallion was stolen from me 5 years ago. Without it, I'm beginning to age again, but not naturally. In patches, in fits and starts. It's excruciating." He rolled up his sleeve to show me his arm, and I had to stifle a scream. His skin was a patchwork of youth and age, smooth and tanned in some places, wrinkled and spotted in others, as if different parts of him were aging at wildly different rates. The people who took it brought it back to Millbrook, he continued. Back to the Caldwells. I can feel it calling to me, but I can't get close enough to retrieve it. The Caldwells have protections against people like me. But you could get it for me, Ellanor. You could walk right into their house, take it, and bring it to me. Do this, and I'll leave Millbrook forever. Your family will never have to fear me again. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, my nightgown soaked with sweat. Just a dream, I told myself. Just a nightmare brought on by reading my grandmother's journal. But when I looked at the clock on my nightstand, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hands had stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. The witching hour, as my grandmother used to call it. The time when the barrier between worlds was thinnest, and there, on the hardwood floor next to my bed, was a set of wet footprints, as if someone had walked in from the rain and stood watching me as I slept. But there had been no rain that night, and the footprints led nowhere, ending abruptly in the middle of the room. I didn't sleep again that night, sitting up in bed with the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. By morning, the footprints had dried, leaving only the faintest outline on the polished wood. I needed answers, and I knew where to start looking for them. The Caldwell family was still in Millbrook, still one of the town's oldest and most respected families. Martin Caldwell, the current patriarch, ran the local historical society and museum, housed in what had once been the town's first schoolhouse. I waited until the afternoon when the museum would be open to visitors and walked the familiar route from Pioneer Hill Road to Main Street. Millbrook hadn't changed much in the years I'd been away. The same storefronts lined the main drag. The same oak trees shaded the town green. The same people nodded to me as I passed, though some had more grey hair. Now, more lines around their eyes. The museum was empty when I arrived, just as I'd hoped. Martin Caldwell was behind the reception desk, his white hair neatly combed, his bow tie perfectly centered. He looked up when the bell above the door jangled, and his polite smile faltered for just a moment when he saw me. Ellanor Harrison, he said. Recovering quickly. Back in town for your grandmother's funeral, I presume. My condolences, Rebecca was a fine woman. Thank you, I said, approaching the desk. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you about something, about a historical matter. Martin's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile remained fixed in place. Of course, that is what I'm here for after all. What period of Millbrook history are you interested in? 1957, I said, watching him carefully. Specifically, October of that year. The change was subtle but unmistakable. A tightening around his eyes, a slight straightening of his posture. An interesting time, he said. Carefully, but not one with many notable events, I'm afraid. What about James Holloway? I asked, the name falling from my lips before I could stop myself. Is he a notable event? Martin went very still, his face draining of color just as my grandmother's had that day in the kitchen so many years ago. Where did you hear that name? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. My grandmother's journal. I found it after she died. She wrote about him, about what he was, about the medallion he stole from your family. Martin glanced at the door, then at the windows as if checking to see if we were truly alone. Finally, he reached beneath the desk and pressed something. A button or switch I couldn't see. There was a soft click, and I heard the lock on the front door engage. Come with me, he said, standing up. This isn't a conversation we should have in the open. He led me through the museum, past glass cases displaying arrowheads and colonial-era household items, old photographs and faded documents to a door marked private. Staff only. Beyond it was a small office, the walls lined with books, the desk buried under stacks of papers. Martin gestured for me to sit in the visitor's chair while he closed and locked the office door behind us. Then he moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and withdrew a thick folder. "Your grandmother never told you about him," he said. It wasn't a question. She kept her promise. "Yes," I said. "She forbade us from even saying his name." I never knew why until I read her journal. Martin nodded, setting the folder on the desk between us. Rebecca was wiser than I gave her credit for back then. Young and foolish in love. Perhaps, but wise enough in the end. He opened the folder to reveal more photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes. James Holloway has many names, many faces. Though the one he showed your grandmother is his true face, the one he returns to again and again. He pushed a photograph across the desk to me. It showed a man who was unmistakably James, though he wore different clothes, his hair styled differently. The picture was dated 1923, taken in Chicago. "We've been tracking him for generations," Martin said. "The Caldwells have been keepers of the medallion since 1692 when my ancestor, Prudence Caldwell, took it from him the first time." He smiled grimly. He wasn't calling himself James Holloway then, of course. He was Jonathan Hawthorne, a visitor to Salem with an unusual interest in the witch trials. "So, it's true?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "He really is immortal, a time traveler." Martin's expression was grave. "Not exactly. Not in the way your science fiction novels might describe it. James, or whatever he calls himself, is something older, something that has existed alongside humanity for millennia, feeding on our fear, our pain, our grief. The medallion doesn't grant immortality. It binds him, controls him. Without it, he's free to drip through time and space as he pleases, taking whatever he wants, whoever he wants. He came to me in a dream last night." I said, the words tumbling out before I could reconsider. "He said the medallion had been stolen from him, that it was back in Millbrook with your family. He asked me to help him get it back." Martin's face hardened. "It's worse than I thought then. If he's reaching out to you, trying to manipulate you, he must be desperate." He ran a hand through his white hair, leaving it slightly disheveled. "The medallion was indeed returned to us. Not 5 years ago as he claimed, but just last month. One of our family who lives in Boston found it in a pawn shop of all places. Recognized it immediately from family descriptions." "How did it end up there?" I asked. "We don't know for certain," Martin said. "But we believe James entrusted it to someone. A lover perhaps, or someone he thought he could control, and they betrayed him. They might not have known what it was, just that it was old and possibly valuable." He reached into his shirt and pulled out a chain, revealing a small metal disc hanging from it. The medallion, it was just as my grandmother had described. About the size of a $50, made of a dull metal I couldn't identify, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change even as I looked at them. "I haven't let it out of my sight since it was returned to us," Martin said, tucking it back beneath his shirt. "The protections around my home have been strengthened. James can't get to it, no matter how much he might want to. But he can get to you, Ellanor. You're vulnerable because of your connection to your grandmother, because of your blood." "What does he want with it?" I asked. My grandmother's journal said he was looking for a way to end his condition, to become mortal again. Martin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Is that what he told her?" "No, Ellanor. James doesn't want to end his condition. He wants to enhance it. The medallion doesn't just bind him. It's the source of his power. With it, he can control when and where he travels. Without it, he's adrift, pulled by currents he can't fully control. He's weaker without it, more vulnerable. That's why he wants it back. I thought of the patchwork aging I'd seen on his arm in my dream. The desperation in his voice. He's afraid, I said. Good, Martin replied firmly. He should be. The medallion is killing him. Slowly but surely. Each time it changes hands. Each time it's lost and found again. His connection to it weakens. Eventually, it will sever completely. And when that happens, he'll die. I finished for him. A true and final death. As he told my grandmother. Martin nodded. Exactly. And he knows it. That's why he's reaching out to you now. Trying to use your grandmother's memory, your family connection to manipulate you into helping him. But why didn't he come back for her? I asked. For my grandmother. She was afraid of him her entire life. Afraid he would return if his name was spoken. But he never did. Not until now, not until she was gone. Martin's expression softened slightly. I can't say for certain. Perhaps he did love her. In his way. Perhaps he wanted to give her the normal life she'd chosen. Or perhaps he simply couldn't. The medallion was lost to him for many years after he left Millbrook. His powers diminished. By the time he found it. Again, your grandmother was married, had children. She was no longer the young woman he'd known. He closed the folder and returned it to the filing cabinet, locking it securely. What I can tell you with certainty is that James Holloway is dangerous. Not just to you or to me, but to everyone in Millbrook. If he regains the medallion, if his full power is restored, there's no telling what he might do, what chaos he might unleash. What do? I asked, feeling suddenly very small, very out of my depth. If he comes to me again, if he tries to use me to get to the medallion, you resist, Martin said simply. You remember that he is a manipulator, a deceiver, he will say whatever he thinks will sway you, that he loved your grandmother, that he means no harm, that he just wants to be free of his curse. None of it is true. He reached across the desk and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. And you come to me day or night, no matter the hour. The Caldwells have been dealing with James Holloway for centuries. We know how to protect ourselves, and we can protect you, too. I left the museum with more questions than answers, my mind reeling from everything Martin had told me. Part of me still wanted to dismiss it all as elaborately constructed fiction, a shared delusion between my grandmother and the Caldwell family. But the evidence was mounting, becoming harder to ignore or explain away. As I walked back toward Pioneer Hill Road, I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I stopped in the middle of the town green, turning slowly in a full circle, scanning the faces of the few people out and about in the late afternoon. None of them were paying particular attention to me, going about their business as usual. But then I noticed him across the green, partially hidden by the Civil War memorial, a tall figure in a dark coat. Even at this distance, I recognized him immediately. James Holloway, looking exactly as he had in the photographs, exactly as he had in my dream. Our eyes met and he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. I blinked and he was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. That night, I double-keyed all the locks in the house, drawing all the curtains tight against the gathering darkness. I considered calling my mother, who was staying with my aunt in Hartford until the weekend. But what would I tell her? That I'd found grandmother's secret journal, that I'd spoken with Martin Caldwell about an immortal being who might be stalking me, that I might have seen said being in the town green. She'd think I was having some kind of breakdown, and honestly, I wasn't entirely sure she'd be wrong. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea. My grandmother's special blend of chamomile and lavender, and settled in the living room with the TV on for company. The sound turned low. I must have dozed off at some point because suddenly I was aware of standing in the kitchen, though I had no memory of walking there. The kitchen was different, older somehow. The modern refrigerator had been replaced by an icebox. The electric stove by a cast iron monstrosity that burned wood. The digital clock on the microwave was gone, replaced by a simple mechanical clock on the wall, its hands pointing to 333. And I wasn't alone. James Holloway sat at the kitchen table, looking exactly as he had in my dream in the town green in the photographs. He was peeling an apple with a small knife, the red skin coming away in one long continuous spiral. "Hello, Ellanor," he said without looking up. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to back away to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, my heart hammering in my chest. "Don't be afraid," he said, setting the knife down and finally meeting my gaze. "This is just a dream, a way for us to talk without interference from the Caldwells." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Against my will, my legs carried me to the chair, and I sat down. My hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. "You spoke with Martin today," James said. It wasn't a question. "He told you his version of our shared history. I assume that I'm some kind of monster, a threat to be contained." He smiled sadly. "The Caldwells have never understood what I am, what the medallion is. They've built their family identity around being my jailers, my enemies. The truth is far more complex." "What are you then?" I asked, finding my voice at last. If not what Martin described, James set the peeled apple on the table between us. Perfectly smooth and white. "I'm a traveler, Ellanor. A witness to history. I've seen civilizations rise and fall. Watched as humanity built and destroyed and built again. I've loved and lost more times than I can count. And yes, I've done things I'm not proud of. Made choices that seemed right at the time, but led to suffering. Who hasn't? Over a life as long as mine." "You're not human," I said. He shrugged, an oddly modern gesture for someone claiming to be centuries old. "Not anymore, perhaps, but I was once. The medallion changed me. Made me something other. Not better or worse, just different. Removed from the normal flow of time. And my grandmother, was she just another in a long line of women you've loved and left?" A flash of genuine pain crossed his face. Rebecca was special. One of the few people in all my years who saw me, truly saw me, and wasn't afraid. Who loved me despite knowing what I was. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. I wanted to take her with me, to share my gift with her. We could have had eternity together, Ellanor, but she chose differently. And I respected her choice. "I stayed away as she wanted until now," I said. "Until she was dead and couldn't tell me to stay away from you." James sat back, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Clever girl, just like your grandmother." "Yes, I've kept my distance. Watched from afar as Rebecca built her life without me. As she had children, as those children had children, as you were. Born, grew up, moved away." His smile faded, but circumstances have changed. "I'm running out of time, Ellanor." He rolled up his sleeve again, showing me his arm. It was worse than in my previous dream. The patchwork aging had spread. The contrast between young and old skin more pronounced, more grotesque. "The medallion is killing me," he said, echoing Martin's words from earlier. "Each day the aging spreads further. Soon it will reach my heart, and when it does," he left the sentence and finished, rolling his sleeve down. "Again. The Caldwells know this. They're counting on it. They want me to die, to cease to exist, to trouble them no more." Martin said, "The medallion is the source of your power." I said, "That you want it back to enhance your condition, not end it." James laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Of course he did. The Caldwells have always feared what they don't understand. The medallion is killing me because it's been separated from me for too long. It needs to return to its rightful owner, me, or it will pull me apart piece by piece." He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch burning cold. "Help me, Ellanor. Get the medallion from Martin Caldwell and bring it to me. I'll leave Millbrook immediately. I swear it. You'll never see or hear from me again. Your family will be free of this curse that Rebecca unwittingly placed upon you all." "And if I refuse," I asked, trying to pull my hand away, but his grip tightened. "Then I'll die," he said simply. "And in my final moments, as the medallion tears me from existence, there will be disruptions, temporal anomalies, you might call them, rifts in the fabric of reality. Millbrook sits on a convergence point. It's why I was drawn here in the first place, why the medallion found its way here. If I die in proximity to that convergence point, the results would be catastrophic." "You're threatening me," I said, "threatening the entire town." James released my hand, his expression regretful. "I'm stating a fact. My death will not be a quiet thing, Ellanor. The medallion has been part of me for too long. Our separation will send shock waves through time itself. Everyone in Millbrook will suffer, not just the Caldwells, who have worked so hard to bring about my end." He stood up. The kitchen around us beginning to fade. The edges of my vision growing dark. "Think about it, Ellanor. The choice is yours. Help me and save your town. Or stand with the Caldwells and watch as Millbrook is torn apart." He leaned down, his lips close to my ear. "You have until midnight tomorrow. Come to the old Simmons farm at the edge of town. Bring the medallion. Come alone." I woke with a start. Still on the sofa in the living room, the TV now showing an infomercial for kitchen gadgets. My teacup had fallen to the floor. The ceramic shattered, the liquid long since soaked into the carpet, and on the coffee table. In front of me, perfectly centered on the glass surface, was a red apple, peeled completely, its skin removed in one continuous spiral. The next day dawned grey and threatening, heavy clouds hanging low over Millbrook like a portent. I hadn't slept again after waking from the dream, spending the remaining hours until dawn researching everything I could find about temporal anomalies, convergence points, rifts in reality, anything that might help me understand what James had described, what might happen if he died. Most of what I found was theoretical physics far beyond my comprehension. Science fiction stories, conspiracy theories, nothing concrete, nothing that told me whether James was telling the truth or spinning another manipulation. By mid-morning, I knew I needed to speak with Martin Caldwell again. If anyone could verify or debunk James' claims, it would be him. I pulled on a raincoat against the drizzle that had started to fall and made my way back to the historical society. The museum was busier today. A small group of elementary school children on a field trip. A couple of tourists examining the display of Native American artifacts. An elderly man I vaguely recognized as one of my grandmother's bridge partners reading a plaque about the town's founding. Martin wasn't at the reception desk. Instead, a young woman I didn't know smiled politely at me. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Martin Caldwell," I said. "Is he in today?" "Mr. Caldwell called in sick this morning," she said, "first time in the 3 years I've worked here. He's usually so reliable." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp weather outside. "Do you know where he lives? It's important that I speak with him." The receptionist hesitated, clearly weighing the propriety of giving out her boss's address against the urgency in my voice. "Are you a friend of his?" "Family friend," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Ellanor Harrison?" My grandmother was Rebecca Harrison. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Harrison from Pine Hill Road. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Caldwell mentioned she'd passed." She lowered her voice. "He lives in the old Caldwell house on Maple Street, the big white colonial with the black shutters. Number 47, but if he's sick, I'll be brief," I promised, already turning toward the door. "Thank you." The rain was falling more heavily now, drumming against my hood as I hurried through the town center toward Maple Street. I knew the Caldwell house by reputation. One of the oldest in town, built in 1723, a perfect example of colonial New England architecture that had been featured in historical preservation magazines. When I reached it, I paused at the gate, taking in the imposing facade, white clapboard siding, black shutters, a wide front porch with classical columns, all surrounded by a meticulous garden now glistening with rain. It looked exactly like what it was. The home of one of Millbrook's oldest and most respected families, preserved through generations of careful stewardship. What it didn't look like was a house with protections against immortal beings, whatever those protections might be. I pushed through the gate and walked up the flagstone path to the front door. My footsteps, oddly loud in the rain-muffled silence. The brass knocker was shaped like a lion's head, worn smooth by centuries of use. I lifted it and let it fall, the sound echoing through the house beyond. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sounds of movement within. "Martin," I called, trying the doorknob. Locked as expected. "Martin, it's Ellanor Harrison. I need to talk to you. It's about James Holloway." Still nothing. I stepped back, looking up at the windows. All the curtains were drawn, no lights visible behind them, despite the gloom of the rainy day. The house had a closed, shuttered feel to it, as if it had been battened down against a coming storm. I circled around to the back, rain plastering my hair to my face despite the hood of my raincoat. The backyard was as well kept as the front, with an herb garden, a small pond, and a detached garage. The back door was locked, too, and the windows here were similarly curtained. But one window, a small one that I guessed led to a bathroom, was cracked open slightly. It was too high for me to reach on my own. But there was a garden bench nearby that I could drag over. I hesitated, aware that I was about to commit breaking and entering. But the sense of wrongness, of danger, had only grown stronger since I'd arrived. Something had happened to Martin Caldwell. I was sure of it, and it had something to do with James Holloway and the medallion. I moved the bench beneath the window and climbed up, pushing the window further open. It was just big enough for me to squeeze through, though it was an undignified process that left me sprawled on the bathroom floor, soaking wet and slightly bruised. "Martin," I called again, getting to my feet. "It's Ellanor. I'm sorry for breaking in, but I was worried." The house was silent. The only sound, the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere and the patter of rain against the windows. I moved cautiously from the bathroom into a hallway, then into what appeared to be the main part of the house. A large open living area with antique furniture, oriental rugs, and walls lined with bookshelves. Martin! A sound caught my attention. A soft, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere below me. The basement, perhaps. I spotted a door that might lead downstairs and approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was locked, but the key was in the lock as if someone had secured it from this side. I turned it and pulled the door open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Martin, I called down. Are you there? The thumping sound grew louder, more insistent. I felt along the wall for a light switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. The power was out, or the bulb was burned out, or someone had deliberately disabled the lights. I took out my phone and switched on the flashlight function, illuminating the staircase. I hesitated at the top, every instinct telling me to turn around, to leave, to call the police. But what would I tell them? That I was worried about a man based on a conversation about an immortal time traveler? Taking a deep breath, I started down the stairs, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the stone walls, casting long, distorted shadows. The basement was larger than I expected, divided into several rooms. The main space was a workshop of sorts with a large table in the center covered in tools and books. Shelves along the walls filled with jars of unidentifiable substances, bundles of dried herbs, small boxes, and containers labeled in a spidery handwriting I couldn't read from a distance. The thumping was coming from behind another door. This one secured with not just a lock, but a heavy wooden bar. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to keep whatever was behind that door contained. Martin, I called again, approaching the door cautiously. Are you in there? The thumping stopped, replaced by a muffled voice I couldn't quite make out. I'm going to try to open the door, I said, setting my phone down so the flashlight illuminated the door and the bar securing it. Stand back if you can. The bar was heavy, but I managed to lift it and set it aside. The lock was more challenging, an old-fashioned keyhole with no key in sight. I looked around the workshop, searching for where a key might be hidden. The voice behind the door grew more insistent, though I still couldn't make out the words. I turned back to the door, noticing for the first time the symbols carved into the wood, similar to those on the medallion, but larger, more elaborate. They seemed to move in the shifting light of my flashlight, changing shape and meaning. As I looked at them, a glint of metal caught my eye. A key hanging on a hook partially hidden behind a shelf, well out of direct line of sight from the door. I retrieved it and returned to the door, my hand shaking slightly as I inserted it into the lock. I'm unlocking the door, I called. I'll have you out in a minute. The lock turned with a heavy click, and I pulled the door open, my flashlight illuminating the space beyond. It was a small room, more a cell than anything else, with stone walls and no windows. In the center, tied to a chair with what looked like ordinary rope, was Martin Caldwell. His white hair was disheveled, his bow tie gone, his usually immaculate shirt stained and torn. A gag had been tied around his mouth, which explained the muffled quality of his voice. But it was his eyes that caught and held my attention, wide with terror, not relief, as he saw me standing in the doorway. He was shaking his head violently, trying to speak around the gag. Martin, I said, rushing forward to untie him. What happened? Who did this to you? I pulled the gag from his mouth and he gasped, drawing in a deep breath. Ellanor. Run, he said, his voice. It's a trap. He's here. Before I could react, before I could even fully process his words. A hand clamped down on my shoulder from behind, spinning me around. James! Holloway stood there, his dark eyes gleaming in the beam of my flashlight, a smile on his lips that didn't reach. Those eyes. "Hello, Ellanor," he said. "How kind of you to join us." He was different from how he'd appeared in my dreams. In the photographs, in the town green, his face was the same, but there was something wrong with it. Patches of skin that were too tight, too young next to areas that were wrinkled and aged. The effect was deeply unsettling, like looking at a poorly made mask. "What have you done to him?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Nothing permanent," James said, his grip on my shoulder tightening painfully. "Martin and I were just having a little chat about the whereabouts of something that belongs to me." His gaze dropped to Martin's chest, where the chain that had held the medallion was now conspicuously absent. "He's been uncooperative so far, but I think with you here, he might be more willing to share." "Don't tell him anything, Ellanor," Martin said from behind me. "No matter what he does." James's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect in his deteriorating face. "So noble, Martin, so willing to suffer for your family's sacred duty." He pushed me aside and stepped into the cell, towering over the bound man. "But are you willing to let Ellanor suffer, too? Are you willing to sacrifice her as your ancestors were willing to sacrifice Rebecca?" "What is he talking about?" I asked, looking from James to Martin. "What about my grandmother?" Martin's expression was grim. "He's trying to manipulate you, Ellanor. To turn you against me, against my family. Don't listen to him." "Tell her, Martin," James insisted, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Tell her what your grandfather told Rebecca when she came to him for help after I was wounded. Tell her what choice he offered her." "It doesn't matter now," Martin said, looking away. "It was a different time, different circumstances." "It matters to me," I said, stepping back into the cell, careful to keep my distance from James. "What choice, Martin? What did your grandfather tell my grandmother?" Martin sighed, seeming to age years in an instant. "My grandfather told Rebecca that the only way to end James' threat permanently was to use her as bait to lure him in with the promise of taking her with him away from Millbrook, and then when he was vulnerable to use a weapon. The family had developed the same weapon that had wounded him initially, a weapon that would have killed her too." James added softly, "A weapon that affects not just me, but anyone connected to me through blood or deeper bonds. Your grandmother would have died in agony, Ellanor. And Martin's grandfather knew it." I looked at Martin, hoping to see denial in his eyes, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. "Is that true?" I asked. "It was deemed an acceptable sacrifice," Martin said stiffly. "One life to end a threat that had persisted for centuries, that had claimed dozens of lives over the years." "But she refused," James said, a note of pride in his voice. "She wouldn't betray me, wouldn't be used as a weapon against me. So, she made a different choice. She chose a normal life, a family, but she made all of you promise never to speak my name, never to call me back to Millbrook, back to danger. She chose to let you escape with the medallion," Martin said bitterly. "To continue your existence at the expense of who knows how many others. The medallion is killing him now," I said, remembering what both of them had told me. "That's why he's back. That's why he looks like this." I gestured to James' patchwork face, his deteriorating body. "Yes," Martin acknowledged. "And if we simply wait, if we do nothing, he will die. A final death as he fears. The threat will be ended without bloodshed, without sacrifice. Except for the temporal disruption that will follow," I said, watching Martin's face carefully. The catastrophic effects on Millbrook when he dies in proximity to the convergence point. A flash of something. Concern. Fear crossed Martin's face too quickly to be sure. He told you that, did he? Another manipulation. Ellanor. There is no convergence point. No risk of temporal disruption. Just the desperate lies of a creature facing extinction. James laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls of the cell. Oh, Martin. Still clinging to the narrow understanding your family has passed down for generations. Still denying what's right in front of you. He turned to me. Ask him about the anomalies, Ellanor. Ask him about the reports. He's been collecting, missing time, objects appearing and disappearing, people seeing things that couldn't possibly be there. Ask him why the Historical Society has a file cabinet full of local folklore that describes exactly these phenomena dating back centuries. I looked at Martin, whose expression had grown increasingly uncomfortable. Is that true? Had there been anomalies, minor occurrences? Martin admitted reluctantly. Nothing that can't be explained by more mundane means, mass hysteria, shared delusions. The power of suggestion, the power of a convergence point growing more unstable by the day, James corrected. A rift in reality that's been contained more or less by my connection to the medallion. A connection that's failing that will shatter completely when I die. He moved closer to me, his voice softening. I'm not asking you to take my word for it, Ellanor. I'm asking you to look at the evidence, to make your own decision. Not for my sake, but for Millbrook's, for everyone you care about. I stepped back, my mind racing. Both men were asking me to trust them, to believe their version of events, their interpretation of what was happening. Both had reason to lie to me, to manipulate me for their own ends, but one of them had tied up the other and locked him in a basement cell. Where's the medallion, Martin? I asked, making my decision. What have you done with it? Martin's face hardened. I'm not going to tell you, Ellanor. I can't. The risk is too great. The risk of doing nothing seems greater, I said. If James is telling the truth, if there really is a convergence point, if his death really would cause some kind of temporal disaster, his lying, Martin insisted. He's always been a liar, a manipulator. It's how he's survived this long, how he's evaded justice for his crimes. What crimes, Martin? I asked. You've told me he's dangerous, a threat, but you haven't told me what he's actually done. What harm he's caused. Martin's eyes darted to James, then back to me. He's a thief of time, Ellanor. He takes what isn't his moment, experiences, lives. He inserts himself into history, changes things to suit his purposes, then moves on, leaving chaos in his wake. I observe, James corrected. I witness. Yes, I've intervened at times. Who wouldn't? With the power to do so, but I've saved more lives than I've taken. Prevented more suffering than I've caused. You play God, Martin spat. You decide who lives, who dies, what changes, what remains the same. No one should have that power. Yet your family has appointed itself my judge, jury, and executioner, James replied. You decide. My fate, the fate of the medallion, potentially the fate of Millbrook itself. How is that different? I'd heard enough. Whatever the truth was, it lay somewhere between these two men and their competing narratives. But I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not with the possibility of catastrophe hanging over my head over the entire town. I'm going to look for the medallion, I said, stepping toward the door of the cell. I need to see it for myself to understand what we're dealing with. Ellanor, don't, Martin pleaded. If you give it to him, if you restore His full power, there's no telling what he might do. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, I said truthfully. But I need all the information before I can make that decision. James moved to block my path, his deteriorating face twisting into a smile. A wise choice, Ellanor, but you don't need to search the house. I already know where the medallion is. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it up for me to see. The medallion hanging from its chain, the symbols on its surface seeming to writhe and pulse in the beam of my flashlight. You had it all along? I asked, confused. Then why? Why tie up, Martin? Why this whole charade? Because the medallion isn't enough on its own, James said, his smile fading. It needs to be freely given. Freely accepted. That's the nature of its power, the condition of the bond it creates. I can hold it, but I can't use it. Can't reconnect with it fully unless someone gives it to me willingly. He held it out to me, the chain dangling from his fingers. Someone like you, Ellanor. Someone of Rebecca's blood. I stared at the medallion, mesmerized by the shifting symbols, the dull gleam of the metal. It looked so ordinary, so harmless. Yet two men were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to possess it or keep it contained. Don't do it, Ellanor. Martin said from behind me, whatever he's promised you, whatever he's threatened, it's not worth the risk. I promised to leave, James reminded me. To take the medallion far from Millbrook, to trouble your family no more. One simple action from you and everyone is safe. Me, you, the town. All you have to do is take the medallion and place it around my neck. That's all. I reached out slowly, my fingers hovering just above the medallion. I could feel something emanating from it. Not heat, not cold, but a kind of presence, as if the medallion itself was alive, aware, watching me. Ellanor, please. Martin's voice was desperate now. Think about what you're doing. I looked at James, at his patchwork face, his eyes that had seen centuries pass, that had witnessed history unfold in real time. If I do this, I said, you swear you'll leave Millbrook. Leave my family alone. You have my word, James said solemnly. I've had my fill of this town, of the Caldwells and their misguided crusade. All I want is to continue my existence, to heal, to travel freely again, and the convergence point, the temporal anomalies, will stabilize once the medallion and I are reconnected, he promised. The rift will close. Millbrook will be safe. I made my decision. I reached out and took the medallion from James, feeling its weight in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, as if it contained more mass than its size suggested was possible. Ellanor, no! Martin shouted, struggling against his bonds. You don't know what you're doing. I think I do, I said quietly, closing my fingers around the medallion. I'm trusting my instincts. I turned away from James toward Martin and saw the despair in the old man's eyes. The certainty that I had doomed us all. And perhaps I had. Perhaps I was making a terrible mistake. But then I thought of my grandmother, of the love she had described in her journal, of the choice she had made to protect both James and herself, of the fear she had lived with for decades. Always wondering if he would return, if the name that must not be spoken would somehow be spoken. I moved to Martin's side and knelt down, bringing the medallion close to the ropes that bound him. I'm sorry, I whispered, but I have to be sure. I pressed the medallion against the rope around Martin's wrist. Not knowing what to expect, not even sure why I was doing it, but something told me, some instinct, some inherited knowledge perhaps, that if the medallion truly was what both men claimed it to be, it would react to the material that was restraining a Caldwell, a keeper of its secrets. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rope began to smoke, to blacken and curl away from the metal disc as if it had been touched by fire. Within seconds, the rope had disintegrated, freeing Martin's right hand. James lunged forward with a snarl, but he was too late. Martin's free hand shot out, grabbing something from his pocket. A small vial of clear liquid. He smashed it against the floor at James's feet, and a cloud of silvery mist erupted, enveloping the tall man. James screamed, a sound of pure agony that made me clap my hands over my ears, the medallion still clutched in my fist. He staggered back out of the cell, collapsing against the workshop table, his body convulsing as the mist swirled around him. "What did you do?" I shouted at Martin, helping him untie his other hand. "What was that?" "A countermeasure," Martin said grimly, freeing himself from the rest of the ropes. "It won't kill him, but it will weaken him, slow him down." He grabbed my arm. "We need to go now. The effect won't last long." We ran for the stairs, Martin moving with surprising speed for a man his age. Behind us, James' screams had subsided to whimpers, but I could hear him moving, dragging himself across the floor of the workshop. "Wait," I said as we reached the bottom of the stairs. "The medallion. We can't leave it." I opened my hand, revealing the medallion still clutched in my palm. Martin's eyes widened. "You didn't give it to him," he said, disbelieving. "You had the chance. But you didn't." "I needed to be sure," I said. "I needed to know who was telling the truth." Martin looked back toward the workshop where the sounds of movement were growing stronger, more coordinated. "We'll discuss this upstairs," he said urgently. "Come on." We ran up the stairs, Martin slamming the door behind us and locking it. Though we both knew it wouldn't hold James for long. Not if even half of what I'd been told about him was true. "We need to leave," Martin said, already moving toward the front door. "My car is in the garage. We can go to the safe house. Figure out what to do with the medallion there." "Wait," I said, not following him. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me the truth. The whole truth, not just the parts you think I need to know." Martin paused, looking back at me. "Ellanor, we don't have time for this. James will recover from the countermeasure any minute now." "Then talk fast," I said, holding up the medallion. "What is this thing really? What does it do, and why am I involved?" Martin sighed, running a hand through his disheveled white hair. "The medallion is older than human civilization. It fell from the sky, according to family lore, a meteorite that cooled to reveal the disk within. The symbols on it are a language no one has ever been able to translate, but they seem to respond to intent, to will. James said it binds him. I said that it's the source of his power, but also his weakness." "That's partially true." Martin admitted the medallion bound itself to him when he found it centuries ago. It granted him the ability to move through time, to exist outside its normal flow, but it also changed him, made him dependent on it. When they're separated, he begins to come apart, as you've seen, the patchwork aging, the deterioration, and the convergence point, the temporal anomalies. Martin hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Also true. Millbrook sits on what some might call a thin spot in reality, a place where the walls between different times, different possibilities are more permeable. The medallion was drawn here because of that, and so was James. Their presence has actually stabilized the convergence point over the years, kept it from leaking, for lack of a better term. So if James dies here, if the connection between him and the medallion is permanently severed, the convergence point could rupture." Martin confirmed, creating the kind of temporal disruption James described, though I believe he exaggerated the scale. The danger is real. And my grandmother, my family, why are we involved in this? Martin looked uncomfortable. Rebecca was special. The medallion responded to her in a way it hadn't to anyone else in centuries. We think it's because of a genetic quirk. Something in her blood that resonated with the medallion's energy. The same quirk that attracted James to her in the first place, though he probably didn't realize it consciously. And that quirk has been passed down to you, Ellanor. I looked down at the medallion in my hand, feeling that strange presence again, that sense of awareness. So, when James said the medallion needed to be freely given by someone of Rebecca's blood, he was telling the truth. Martin said, the medallion responds to intent, to will. It needs to be given freely to create a proper bond, and it needs to be given by someone it recognizes, someone with the right frequency, for lack of a better term. Someone like me. Yes, Martin said grimly. That's why he came back now after all these years. He knew Rebecca was gone, but her bloodline continues. You're the key to restoring his connection to the medallion, to saving his life. A loud crash from downstairs made us both jump. James was free, and from the sound of it, he was angry. We need to go, Martin said more urgently. This time. Please, Ellanor, we can continue this conversation somewhere safe. I nodded, finally convinced. Whatever the whole truth was, whatever nuances and complexities I was still missing, one thing was clear. James Holloway was dangerous, and he wanted the medallion more than anything. We ran for the front door, Martin grabbing a coat from the rack as we passed. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof and windows. Martin fumbled with his keys, his hand shaking as he unlocked the door. The garage is around back, he said. Stay close to me. We dashed out into the rain, but we'd only made it halfway down the front path when the door burst open behind us. James stood in the doorway, his face a twisted mask of rage and pain, the silvery mist still clinging to his clothes, his skin. Ellanor, he shouted, his voice distorted, almost inhuman. The medallion. Give it to me. Run, Martin yelled, shoving me toward the gate. Go. I'll hold him off. But go. Martin turned to face James, pulling something else from his pocket. Another vial, this one filled with a dark liquid. Get to the safe house. You know where it is. I didn't, but there was no time to argue. I clutched the medallion tightly and ran, pushing through the gate and out onto Maple Street. The rain was blinding now, soaking me to the skin within seconds. Behind me, I heard James roar again, followed by the sound of breaking glass and Martin's shout of pain. I ran without direction at first, just trying to put distance between myself and the confrontation at the Caldwell house. The streets of Millbrook were deserted, everyone sensibly inside on such a miserable day. The rain washed away any sound of pursuit, but I didn't slow down. My lungs burning, my legs aching. I found myself on Main Street, passing the darkened windows of the Historical Society, the library where my grandmother had worked, the diner where I'd spent countless Saturday mornings as a child. Familiar places made strange and threatening by what I now knew. By what was happening. Where could I go? Where would be safe from James? The house on Pioneer Hill Road was empty. My mother still in Hartford, the police station. What would I tell them? That I was being chased by an immortal time traveler who wanted a magical medallion. The church, I decided, St. Michael's at the end of Main Street. It was old, built in the 1700s with thick stone walls and heavy doors. It might not stop James for long, but it would give me time to think, to plan. I changed direction, heading for the church's spire visible through the rain. As I ran, I became aware of oddities. Moments where the rain seemed to freeze in midair, suspended for a heartbeat before continuing its fall. Glimpses of buildings that shouldn't be there. A blacksmith's forge where the pharmacy now stood. A dirt track instead of paved. Road beneath my feet. The convergence point was becoming unstable, just as James and Martin had warned. The separation between James and the medallion, the violence of their confrontation, was causing the very disruptions they had feared. I reached the church and yanked on the heavy wooden door. Relieved when it opened, I slipped inside, closing it behind me, and leaned against it, gasping for breath. The church was empty, lit only by a few candles at the altar and the grey light filtering through the stained glass windows. It smelled of old wood, beeswax, and incense. Scents unchanged since my childhood, since my grandmother's childhood before that. I moved down the center aisle toward the altar, the medallion still clutched in my hand. What was I going to do? I couldn't give it to James. Not after seeing his rage, his desperation. But if I didn't, if the connection between them was permanently severed, what would happen to Millbrook? To the convergence point, I reached the altar and sank onto the first pew, my wet clothes leaving a dark stain on the polished wood. I opened my hand and looked at the medallion, the symbols on its surface moving and shifting in the candle light. What are you? I whispered to it. What do you want? To my shock, the medallion grew warm in my palm. The symbols glowing with a soft golden light. I felt a presence in my mind. Not words exactly, but impressions, images. The medallion was communicating with me or trying to. I saw James as he had been centuries ago, young and curious, finding the medallion in a cave somewhere in Europe. I saw him change as the medallion bonded with him. Saw him discover his abilities, his freedom from time's constraints. I saw his wonder turn to arrogance, his exploration turn to manipulation as he realized the power he wielded. And I saw the Caldwells generation after generation tracking him, studying him, developing countermeasures against him, not out of malice, as James believed, but out of fear and a sense of duty. They saw themselves as protectors, guardians against a force they didn't fully understand, but knew could be dangerous if left unchecked. I saw my grandmother, young, beautiful, in love with James, despite knowing what he was. I saw her choice, her decision to live a normal life, to protect her family by forbidding them from ever speaking his name. I saw her grief, her longing, the life she might have had if she'd chosen differently. And I saw possibilities, futures branching out from this moment, from the choice I was about to make. James with the medallion, restored to his full power, traveling through time. Once more. Sometimes benevolent, sometimes cruel, always outside the rules that governed everyone else. The Caldwells continuing their endless vigil generation after generation. Millbrook. Safe for now, the convergence point stabilized. But for how long? Or James? Without the medallion, dying a true death, the convergence point rupturing, Millbrook torn apart by temporal anomalies, lives lost or irrevocably changed, and the medallion itself waiting for a new bearer, a new traveler to bond with, perhaps even me. If what Martin had said about my blood, my connection to it, was true, there was a third possibility, one that neither James nor Martin had considered. A new kind of bond, a new arrangement. The medallion showed me this possibility. Too, though less clearly, as if it was uncertain, untested. The heavy door of the church burst open, slamming against the wall with a sound like thunder. James stood in the doorway, rain streaming from his clothes, his face more deteriorated than ever. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Martin limping but still pursuing, still fighting. Ellanor, James said, his voice calmer now. Controlled. I'm sorry about what happened at the house. I lost control when I saw you hesitate. So you turned to Martin. But I'm better now. He stepped into the church, moving slowly down the aisle toward me. Please just give me the medallion. Let me leave Millbrook as I promised. No one else needs to get hurt. I stood up, the medallion still warm in my hand, its glow visible now between my fingers. You were going to hurt Martin, I said. Maybe kill him. He's been trying to kill me for years, James replied, still advancing. He and his family before him. Can you blame me for defending myself? You tied him up, locked him in his own basement. James smiled, an unsettling sight on his patchwork face. A precaution. I needed time to find the medallion to talk to you without his interference. He was halfway down the aisle now. I would have released him after we left. He was never in any real danger. Liar. Martin gasped. From the doorway, clutching his side, where a dark stain was spreading through his shirt. He was going to kill me as soon as he had the medallion, just as he's killed others who stood in his way over the centuries. James' smile faltered. That's not true, Ellanor. I'm not a murderer. I've lived too long. Seen too much death to take life casually. He took another step toward me. The medallion is killing me. You've seen what's happening to my body. Help me, please. I looked from James to Martin, then down at the medallion in my hand, still glowing with that soft golden light. The third possibility, the one neither of them had considered, was becoming clearer to me. The medallion doesn't belong to either of you, I said, closing my fingers around it again. It's not a weapon or a tool. It's alive in its way. It has its own will, its own purpose. James frowned. What are you talking about? The medallion is a source of power, nothing more. No, I said. Certainty growing within me. It's more than that. It's watching, learning. It's been doing so for centuries. Through you, through the Caldwells, through everyone who's come in contact with it. I held it up, letting them both see the glow emanating from between my fingers. And it's been waiting for someone who could understand that, who could form a different kind of bond with it. Ellanor, Martin warned, making his way painfully into the church. Whatever it's showing you, whatever it's making you feel, don't trust it. The medallion manipulates. It's how it survives. How it finds new bears when it needs to. Maybe I acknowledged. But I think it's also trying to evolve to find a better way of existing in our world. It doesn't want to control or be controlled. It wants partnership. James' expression had changed. A mix of fear and fascination replacing his desperation. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath. Feeling the medallion's warmth spreading up my arm, its presence growing stronger in my mind. I'm going to make a new choice. Different from the one my grandmother made. Different from anything the Caldwells have tried. Different from what you want, James. I lifted the medallion by its chain and before either man could stop me, placed it around my neck. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The glow intensified, enveloping me in golden light. I felt the medallion's presence expand in my mind, not taking over, but merging, sharing, communicating in a way that transcended words or images. I understood suddenly and completely what it was, what it wanted. It had come from elsewhere, a traveler between worlds as well as times, seeking understanding, connection, growth. It had found James centuries ago and bonded with him, giving him the power to move through time in exchange for experiences, for knowledge. But the bond had been imperfect, unbalanced, James taking more than he gave. The medallion unable to fully express its own will. Now it had found me, a descendant of Rebecca, carrying the genetic quirk that allowed for a clearer, more equal connection. It didn't want to control me or be controlled by me. It wanted a true partnership, a shared journey. Ellanor. Martin's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's happening to you? I looked down at my hands and saw they were glowing from within. The same golden light as the medallion. My perception was shifting, expanding. I could see the church as it was now, but also as it had been at various points in its history. Newly built in 1723, expanded in 1847, renovated in 1906, and countless services, weddings, funerals in between, all existing simultaneously. In my awareness. I'm changing, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, layered with echoes of other times, other possibilities, becoming something new, something neither of you anticipated. James had fallen to his knees, his deteriorating body unable to support him any longer. The medallion, he gasped. It's killing me faster now. It's letting me go. I moved toward him, feeling a strange mixture of pity and understanding. Yes, I said. Your bond is breaking, but it doesn't have to be the end for you, James. I reached out and touched his forehead, the medallion guiding me, showing me what to do. The golden light flowed from my fingers into him, and I felt the medallion reclaiming something. Not his life, not his consciousness, but the part of itself that had been bound to him for centuries, the connection that had allowed him to travel through time. James gasped, his body convulsing once, then going still. For a moment, I thought he had died, but then he drew a shuddering breath, and before our eyes, his body began to change. The patchwork aging smoothed out. The deterioration reversed, leaving him looking normal. Human, his true age, which I now knew was 34 when he'd found the medallion in 1587. What did you do to me? He asked, his voice steady, without the strain of pain for the first time since I'd met him. I freed you, I said. The medallion has taken back the power it gave you, the connection that was killing you. You're mortal now, James. You'll age and die like everyone else. He stared at his hands, turning them over in wonder. I can feel it. The weight of centuries. It's gone. I'm just me again. Yes, I said, stepping back. You have a chance to live a normal life. Now. To experience the world as everyone else does, one day at a time, 1 year at a time. Make the most of it. I turned to Martin, who was leaning against a pew, his wound still bleeding, but not as heavily as before. The medallion was guiding me again, showing me what needed to be done. Your family's vigil is over. Martin, I said, approaching him. The Caldwells can rest now. James is no longer what he was. And I hesitated, feeling the medallion's presence in my mind, gentle, but insistent. I will be something different, a new kind of traveler with a different purpose. What purpose? Martin asked, his eyes fixed on the medallion at my throat, still glowing with golden light. To learn, to understand, to witness as James did, but also to heal where possible. The medallion has shown me the convergence point, the instability it's been holding back. There are others like it around the world, thin spots in reality that need attention, that need mending. I touched Martin's side where he was wounded, and the golden light flowed again, knitting the damaged flesh, stopping the bleeding. He straightened in surprise, the pain visibly leaving his face. How did you? The medallion gives as well as takes, I said. James never fully understood that or chose not to use that aspect of its power, but I can see it clearly now. I stepped back. letting my hand fall to my side. I need to go soon. There are other convergence points calling for attention, other rifts that need healing. You're leaving? Martin asked, sounding lost. What about? Your life here? Your family? I smiled, feeling a mixture of sadness and excitement. I'll come back. Time will work differently for me now, but I'll always return to Millbrook to check on the convergence point if nothing else. I looked at James, who was still kneeling, still coming to terms with his new mortality. And to make sure you're both keeping your end of the bargain. What bargain? James asked, looking up at me. You live your life, James. Quietly. Normally making amends where you can for the chaos you've caused. And you, Martin, you and your family, let him live that life in peace. The vendetta ends today. Both men nodded slowly, seemingly caught up in the strange calm that had settled over the church, the sense of an ending and a beginning woven together. I felt the medallion pulse against my skin, its warmth intensifying. It was time to go. There were other places that needed me. Other times I needed to see. I have to leave now, I said, backing toward the altar. But I'll return. This isn't goodbye. Not really. Ellanor, wait. Martin said, stepping forward. At least let us tell your mother what happened, where you've gone. I shook my head. I'll tell her myself when the time is right. For now, just say I needed some time away to process grandmother's death to figure out what's next for me. I smiled. It's not even a lie, really. The golden light was growing brighter, enveloping me more completely. I could feel the medallion's eagerness, its readiness to show me what it knew, what it had seen, what it could do. Ellanor, James called, standing up. At last. Be careful. The medallion, it has its own agenda. It always has. No, I said. The light now so bright I could barely see them. But so do I. And together we might just do some good in the world. The light flared one final time. And then I was gone from the church, from Millbrook. From that moment in time, the medallion and I together, embarking on a journey neither of us could have imagined before that rainy day when I discovered my grandmother's journal. When I finally understood why she had forbidden us from saying his name, not out of fear for herself, not even out of fear for us, but out of hope. Hope that someday someone would make a different choice, would find a better way. As I had done, as I would continue to do across time, across worlds, healing rifts, witnessing history, learning, growing, understanding, my grandmother's granddaughter, the medallion's partner, a new kind of traveler. And someday, when I'd seen enough, learned enough, done enough, I would return to Millbrook one last time, to the house on Pioneer Hill Road, to my family, to whatever family I might someday have of my own. But that's a story for another time.